There's something I've watched happen to people, and I want to talk about it plainly. The way one man talks to another across a kitchen table late at night. I've seen people carry a weight they couldn't name. Not depression exactly, not restlessness. Something older than that. A sense that they were placed somewhere on purpose, dropped into a life that never quite fit, like a key cut for a lock in another house. If you've felt that, I'm not going to flatter you tonight. I'm going to try to tell you the truth as I've come to understand it. My name is Walter. I've spent most of my life paying attention to people, not studying them in books, but watching them, listening to the things they say when they think no one's measuring their words. And over the years, I've noticed a pattern in a certain kind of person. They don't belong easily. They feel responsible for things that aren't theirs to carry. They walk into a room and somehow the temperature of it changes, and they're the last to notice. People come to them with their wounds. Strangers tell them secrets in line at the grocery store, and they go home exhausted without understanding why. The title that brought you here calls such a person an angel disguised as a human. I want to be careful with that phrase because it can be cheapened into something silly. But there's a real thing underneath it, and the scriptures take it seriously, even if most pulpits rush past it. The Hebrew word we translate as angel is malach. It doesn't mean a creature with wings. It means a messenger, a sent one, someone dispatched with a purpose that originates somewhere higher than themselves. And the strange thing, the thing almost nobody mentions, is that in the oldest stories, you often couldn't tell the messengers apart from ordinary men. They arrived dusty from the road. They ate. They sat down. Abraham, in the heat of the day, saw 3 travelers approaching his tent and ran to meet them, washed their feet, fed them bread and a calf he'd had prepared. He treated them as guests. Only later does the account reveal who had actually been standing in his yard. The writer of Hebrews looked back at moments like that and said plainly that some people have entertained angels without knowing it. That phrase undoes me a little every time. It means the disguise was good enough to fool even the host. And if it could fool the host, what makes you so sure you'd recognize it in yourself? I'm not telling you that you are literally a spirit being who forgot its origin. I want to be honest about the limits of what I can claim. But I am telling you that the line between a human carrying out a divine errand and a messenger sent from beyond is thinner in Scripture than we've been taught. When God wanted to confront a king, He didn't always send fire. He sent Nathan, a man, who walked into David's palace and told a story about a poor man's lamb until the king condemned himself out of his own mouth. Nathan was the message. The man was the medium. And I've come to believe some of you were sent the same way, not with trumpets, but as the trumpet itself. There's a detail in that word, malach, that I want you to hold on to because it changes how you read your own life. The same Hebrew term gets used for the human prophets and for the heavenly beings. The text doesn't draw a hard wall between them. Malachi, the last book of the Old Testament, is literally named my messenger. A man's whole identity collapsed into the function he served. He wasn't remembered for his face or his lineage. He was remembered for what he was sent to carry. I find that both sobering and freeing. Sobering, because it means the assignment matters more than the recognition. Freeing, because it means you don't have to be extraordinary in yourself. You only have to be willing to carry what was placed in your hands. Let me sit with this idea of being sent for a reason you didn't choose, because that's the part that aches. Nobody asks to be born into the family they were born into. Nobody volunteers for the particular set of troubles that shaped their childhood. And yet, I've watched people spend decades trying to escape exactly the thing they were placed there to redeem. There's a pattern in the old stories that I can't stop seeing. The person God uses is almost never the person who had it easy. Joseph was sold by his own brothers, lied about, thrown into a pit and then a prison, and the whole machinery of betrayal was, from heaven's angle, a delivery system. He told them so himself, years later, with tears. You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good, to keep many people alive. He was sent to Egypt. The cruelty was the transport. The suffering was the road. I think about that a lot. Because if you're the kind of person this message is for, you've probably already lived through something that should have destroyed you and somehow didn't. You came out the other side carrying a strange tenderness toward people in the same pit you were once in. That's not random. A man who has never been cold can describe a fire. A man who has nearly frozen knows how to build one. There's a reason wounded people so often become the ones others run to. The wound itself was part of the equipping. I don't say that to make light of what you went through. I say it because I've watched people waste years being bitter about the very thing that was making them useful. And notice something about Joseph that we tend to skip past. For 13 years, none of it made sense. 13 years between the pit and the palace. There was no running narration telling him his suffering was a delivery system. He didn't get the explanation until the very end, looking backward. That's the part nobody warns you about. The meaning of your placement is almost always read in reverse. While you're inside it, it just feels like Egypt, like being far from home, falsely accused, forgotten in a cell by a man who promised to remember you. If you're waiting to understand why you're where you are before you'll act faithfully where you are, you may wait your whole life. The understanding comes later. The faithfulness has to come first. Now, I want to slow down and talk about the loneliness, because this is where so many of you live and don't have words for it. If you were sent here as a messenger, then by definition, you don't fully come from here. And something in you knows that. It shows up as a low hum of not belonging that follows you into every room, even rooms full of people who love you. Elijah felt it. After the greatest victory of his life, fire falling from heaven, the prophets of Baal defeated in front of the whole nation, he ran into the wilderness, sat down under a solitary tree, and asked God to let him die. He said, "I am the only one left." He wasn't, of course. God told him there were 7,000 others who hadn't bent the knee, but Elijah couldn't see them. The isolation felt total. And here's what strikes me. God didn't rebuke him for the despair. He fed him. He let him sleep. He sent an angel, there's that word again, to touch him and say, "The journey is too great for you. Eat." Heaven's response to a burned-out messenger was not a lecture. It was bread and rest and a quiet voice. And look at the timing of Elijah's collapse. It came right after the mountaintop. That's not a coincidence I think we can afford to ignore. The lowest valleys in the lives of sent people tend to arrive immediately after the highest victories. You do the thing you were made to do, you pour yourself out completely, the fire falls, and then you crash so hard you want to die. If that's been your experience, I need you to hear that you are not broken and you are not alone in it. The pattern is ancient. The expenditure of purpose leaves a person empty, and an empty person under a tree feels like a failure even when they've just succeeded. The despair was not a sign Elijah had lost his calling. It was the cost of having spent it fully. I've been Elijah under that tree. I'll tell you the truth about myself, since I'm asking you to be honest about yourself. There was a season in my life, years ago now, when I had done what I thought was the right thing for a long time, helping where I could, carrying people, showing up, and I hit a wall so hard I couldn't get out of bed. Not from one big tragedy, from the slow accumulation of being the strong one. I remember lying there in the dark thinking, if I'm so chosen, why does it feel like being abandoned? And I didn't get a flash of light. What I got over the following weeks was a series of small things. A neighbor I barely knew left soup on my porch. A letter arrived from someone I'd helped a decade earlier, telling me what it had meant, written for no reason except that I'd crossed his mind. Bread under the tree. I started to understand that being sent doesn't mean being self-sufficient. The messenger still has to eat, and often the way heaven feeds a messenger is through another messenger who doesn't know that's what they're doing. That season taught me something I'd been too proud to learn any other way. I had built an entire identity out of being the one who gives, and I had quietly decided that needing help was for other people, weaker people, people who hadn't been sent. And lying there, unable to function, I had to face the arrogance hidden inside my so-called servanthood. Because if I would help anyone but refuse to be helped by anyone, what I was really saying was that I stood a little above the people I served. The soup on the porch humbled me. The letter humbled me. I had to receive, and receiving felt like dying a little, and the dying turned out to be exactly what I needed. There's a reason the same God who tells us to wash each other's feet also knelt down and washed his disciples' feet and told Peter, who tried to refuse, that unless he allowed it, he could have no part in him. Even Peter had to learn to receive before he was fit to give. This is one of the marks I've learned to look for in the people I'm describing. They are unusually attuned to the pain of others and unusually blind to their own. They'll sit with a grieving friend for 6 hours and never mention that they themselves haven't slept in 3 days. There's a kind of person who absorbs the suffering in a room the way a cloth absorbs water, and they go home heavy and assume that's just life. I want to say something direct to that person because it took me too long to learn it. Your sensitivity is not a flaw to be medicated away, but it is also not a license to neglect yourself into the ground. Even Jesus withdrew. The Gospels keep noting it almost as an aside. And he went up the mountain by himself to pray, and he departed to a deserted place. The most purposeful life ever lived included regular, deliberate retreat. If the one we follow needed solitude to refill, the idea that you can pour out endlessly without replenishing is not humility. It's a slow form of self-destruction dressed up as virtue. Let me come back to the question buried in the title, the shocking reason you might have been sent. I don't think the reason is what most people assume. We imagine being chosen means being elevated, being noticed, being given the platform, the recognition, the visible victory. But the consistent witness of Scripture is almost the opposite. The ones who are sent are usually sent down, not up, sent into the hard place, sent to the people nobody else will go to. Moses was raised in a palace and sent back to the brickyards. Esther had the crown and was reminded that the crown was given to her for a single, dangerous moment. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? The reason you were placed here may not be glamorous at all. It may be one conversation, one person you're meant to reach who no one else can reach because no one else carries your exact combination of scars and language and presence. I've watched this happen in ways that still give me chills. A woman I knew spent her whole life feeling like a failure by the world's measurements. Never the career, never the marriage that lasted, never the things her family praised. But there was a young man in her neighborhood, the kind of kid everyone had written off, and for some reason he trusted her. She fed him. She told him the truth without flinching. And that boy is alive today, with a family of his own, because one overlooked woman was placed within reach of him at the one window of time when he could still be turned. Was that her whole reason for being here? I don't know how to weigh a thing like that. But I know the world's scale and heaven's scale are not the same scale, and I've stopped trusting the world's. There's a moment in Daniel that I keep returning to. Daniel is fasting and grieving, and an angelic messenger finally arrives and says something extraordinary. From the first day you set your heart to understand, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But, he says, I was delayed. There was resistance. Something unseen had opposed the message for 21 days. I sit with that, and I think about how many of you feel like your prayers vanish into the ceiling, like you've been waiting on an answer that isn't coming. And here is this ancient text suggesting that the answer was dispatched the very first day, and what you experienced as silence was actually a struggle you couldn't see. I'm not going to pretend I understand the mechanics of that, but I find it steadying. The delay is not always rejection. Sometimes the messenger is on the road, fighting headwinds you'll never witness, carrying something to you that left the moment you first asked. And if that's true of the answers coming to you, consider that it might be true of you as the answer going to someone else. You may be a delayed message in someone's life right now. You may be the bread heaven is sending to a person under their own solitary tree, and you have no idea, and you won't get to see the moment it lands. Most messengers don't. The ones in the old stories deliver the word, and then they're gone from the account entirely. We never learn their names. They show up, they shift the course of a life, and the text moves on without them. There's a humility built into the role that the world will never reward and may never even notice. I think part of being sent is making peace with being uncredited. I want to be careful here, because this kind of talk can curdle into something proud. I've seen it. People take an idea like this and inflate themselves with it. I'm special. I'm chosen. The rest of you are ordinary. That is the precise opposite of what the messengers in Scripture demonstrate. The truer the calling, the smaller they tend to become. John the Baptist, who Jesus said was the greatest born of women, described himself as a voice, not even a person. A voice in the wilderness, crying out, and then content to decrease so that another could increase. The mark of a real messenger is not that they feel superior, it's that they've stopped needing to be the center of the story. If this idea makes you feel better than the people around you, you've misunderstood it. The disguise is part of the dignity. You were made to look like everyone else, precisely so that the help could come close without frightening anyone. And that's worth sitting with, why the disguise matters at all. When the heavenly visitors came to Abraham and to Lot, they came looking like travelers. not like blazing terrors, because a blazing terror cannot sit at your table and share your bread. The whole point of the ordinary appearance is access, proximity. A messenger who arrived in overwhelming glory would send everyone running for cover. A messenger who arrives looking tired and human can be invited in, can be trusted, can get close enough to actually change something. So if you've spent your life wishing you were more obviously remarkable, more gifted, more striking, more impossible to ignore, consider that your very ordinariness may be the most strategic thing about you. The camouflage isn't a downgrade. It's the delivery mechanism. People let you near their wounds precisely because you don't frighten them. So what do you do with this, practically, when you close this and go back to your life? I'll tell you what I've come to do, and you can take it or leave it. First, I stopped despising my own oddness. The not belonging I used to fight, I now treat as information. It's the homesickness of someone who has work here but origins elsewhere, and instead of numbing it, I let it point me toward the people who feel it too. We tend to find each other. The 7,000 Elijah couldn't see were real, and they're real for you. Second, I started taking the small promptings seriously. The sudden urge to call someone, the name that won't leave your mind, the stranger you feel inexplicably drawn to help. I used to dismiss those as random. I don't anymore. I think that's a good portion of how a sent person receives their assignments. Not in thunder, but in a quiet nudge that's easy to ignore. And third, I learned to eat the bread when it's offered, to let myself be cared for. Because a messenger who refuses all rest will deliver fewer messages, not more. Jeremiah said something I want you to hear in full, because it's the truest description of a sent person's heart I know. After all his weeping and all his complaining, after telling God he wanted to quit, he admitted that when he tried to hold the message in and say no more, it became like a fire shut up in his bones, and he grew weary holding it in and could not. That's the secret underneath the suffering. The reason you can't simply walk away and live a small, comfortable, self-protected life is that there's a fire in you, and a contained fire burns worse than a spent one. You were not built to hold it in. You were built to let it out. And yes, letting it out costs you, but holding it in costs more. I keep thinking about Jacob, who wrestled all night with someone he couldn't quite identify, and walked away with a blessing and a limp, both. The blessing and the limp came from the same encounter. He named the place Peniel, the face of God, and said, I have seen God face to face, and my life was preserved. And then the sun rose on him as he walked, limping. I think that's the truest picture of the life I'm describing. You will be blessed, and you will be marked. You'll carry something holy, and you'll walk with a limp the rest of your days, and the two will be inseparable, and you'll learn not to ask for one without the other. The limp is how you'll recognize the other messengers, by the way. We all walk a little crooked. We've all wrestled through a night we couldn't explain to anyone. I've talked long enough. I told you I wouldn't flatter you, and I hope I haven't. What I've tried to do instead is take seriously a feeling you've probably carried alone for years. The sense of being placed here on purpose, of not quite fitting, of being responsible for more than your fair share of other people's burdens, and to show you that the oldest book we have takes that feeling seriously too. You may never get a sign that confirms it. Most of the messengers never did. They simply went where they were sent, said what they were given to say, fed who they were placed near, and trusted that it mattered even when they couldn't see the result. I think you can do the same. I think you already have been, more than you know. Before you go, I want to hear from you, because these conversations only matter if they go both ways. So tell me, in the comments below, not a thank you, not a quick word, but something real. When in your life did you feel most clearly that you'd been placed somewhere on purpose? For one specific person or one specific moment? Tell the story. Give me the details. Someone reading is going to need to hear that they're not the only one who's felt it, and your account might be the very bread that lands under their solitary tree tonight. I'll be reading. I always do.